Hello and welcome to the Pots and Trowels podcast with me, Martin Fish, joined by Sean and Jill.
Hello.
For this edition. Hello, good to
Hello.
see you all again. We're going to be talking to a guest, more about that in a second. I've got a few things that you can be doing in the garden, and I think we've started to get a few questions now filtering through, which is something that we want to do. So this is a little plea from me, who loves answering questions, and I like asking them as well. Please send them in, and Sean will give you the details of how to do that later on.
But it would help if we know where you are, if you are asking a question. So Sean.
Yeah, we know we've got quite a lot of people watching the videos from all around the world, and I'm sure there'll be people listening to the podcast from around the world. I'll give you those details now, because then you don't have to, run around. And if you haven't got a pen handy, then obviously we can give you them again later on. But it's if you did, just drop us an email, info@potsandtrowels.com. Drop us an email at info@potsandtrowels.com. Let us know what's your name, where'd you come from, and we'll try and get to your question.
We don't necessarily need your postcode. We just want to know the region, the county or the country that you live in.
And let me just clarify that definitely will be Martin answering the questions, because if you ask me a gardening question, you're likely to get a very silly answer.
So what happens if I have a week off and you're at the helm, answering questions, Sean?
Google will be my friend, or I'll be, to be honest, one of my things I might do is get in touch with today's guest, John Stirland, who Martin caught up with earlier.
Well, it's great to catch up with you, John. Don't see much of you these days. And it's, now 30 years since we first met and started working.
Is it really?
I know it is. But I know you've worked in horticulture a lot longer than that. So how did it all start, and what made you go into horticulture?
Well, agriculture was my favourite, because my dad was a farmer, and I thought, it'd be nice to carry on. And in fact, after I left school, I did do it on a pig farm and stuff like that. But then I got the opportunity to go to Boots. Boots had an agrochemical research station in Nottingham. And so I went there, and it was wonderful, because what you did, you went round, you'd go round the gardens and work there for 3 months. Then you'd go in machinery and work there, and then you'd go out on trial work for three months. And we used to go around like that, 3 months in the glass houses. And eventually I settled in the glass houses, and absolutely wonderful, because it was the old way of doing things, Martin. It was I'd got George. Albert Parks was in charge of the glass houses. George Reynolds was the gardens. John Frisbee was machinery, and so I settled in the glass houses, and it was absolutely fantastic. And we had to do things properly. It really was. There was no messing about, cutting roses down with a chainsaw and things like that. No way. It was done really, really well. And it was all under Arthur Billett, who used to be on telly.
Well, he was Gardener's World in the olden days, the original Gardener's World, wasn't he, Arthur Billett?
Yeah.
Yes. So when did you start there, John? Would that be the early 60s?
Yeah, 65
right.
When I left school. 66 probably. Yeah. And then I had 10 years there. But I moved because I knew Boots were finishing their agrochemical. They were getting out of it. They were going to shearing, and then Monsanto.
Right,
but it was the time when glyphosate came in. So I was involved early on with the early trials of glyphosate, which is fascinating. Yeah.
And this is, of course, Boots, as in Boots the chemist, the high street chemist, isn't it? And it was a huge business in Nottingham, wasn't it? Which was all started by Jesse Boots, of course, wasn't it? And I went down there, it's not that many years ago, the old Boots site, which is on the outskirts of Nottingham, and it is purpose built. All these factories built in the 20s, 30s and 40s with beautiful gardens between. It was amazing to go. It's like a completely like a film set almost.
Yes.
Off a film.
Yes, I think it was Mr. Puddle's brother, Mr. Puddle of Bodnant Gardens. His brother used to look after it. Yes, but I was up at the research station, which was Lenton House, which was Jesse Boots' house. Right. And so he built this research station around the house. And of course, the gardens were meticulous under George. Yeah.
Now, Arthur Billett, I mean, a lot of the people listening to this, like you say, probably won't have any idea who Arthur Billett is, but he's going back, Gardener's World back into the 60s when Percy Thrower was a big name. So in those days, Arthur Billett, although he was a television presenter on a gardening program, he still had a full-time job.
Yes, he was in charge of the research station.
Yeah. And am I right? Because he was down in Worcestershire, wasn't he? So he'd go back down to do the filming.
Yes, Clack's Farm.
That's
amazing.
Right.
Yes, it was Clack's Farm, and he used to regularly, after he retired, he used to regularly come up and he'd have a box of apples and take from Boots Farms, take them back to Clack's Farm and say, "Look here, Perce, I just picked these off my own tree." Oh, the things they got up to them days, Mark.
Exactly. You wouldn't get away with it now. So that's, quite a long time ago, 65. Yeah. You went on and did some lecturing then. You had quite a few years lecturing, didn't you? Because you, again, love the practical element and passing on those skills to young people.
Well, yes. I mean, Adrian, bless him, Adrian Johnson was another one of my heroes. He'd gone to Broomfield because they'd got nobody who could do it. There's lots of people who could talk about it, and he says, "Oh, you want to come?" So I thought, well, I'll go. And they'd suddenly got two practical people who could show people how to take cuttings and graft and this sort of thing. So yes, I had 8 years actually, 8 years there till Adrian died, and then I went on my own. But it was in 1976, just after I'd finished Boots, that's when I started Radio Nottingham, and at 43, 44 years there. And of course, you joined me sort of half the way through, I should think.
Yeah, I think you've been doing it about 12 years when I
joined.
And
then Adrian died, and that was it. Yes,
it was 1993. I started working with you on Radio Nottingham.
That's it. Yeah,
on the Thursday morning phone-in, and then we had our own Sunday program as well, didn't we? And,
that was wow.
Yes, and then we went into the television side of it. So we were doing a lot in the day for the BBC.
Yes. East Midlands Telly, up the garden path. We had some great fun with some great and the cameramen loved it. Rather than just standing outside a courtroom filming somebody coming out of a court, they could go and use their imagination and film in a garden, and they loved it. And the producers as well.
Exactly. Well, Sean, who Sean Riley, does our videos for us, and he's part of the Pots and Trowels team. Sean was relaying the story on our first podcast when we introduced ourselves, and he joined the BBC in the early noughties, 2003, 4. I can't remember exactly. And he remembers the first time going filming with me and you, and he said it was always a treat for people to go out with the gardeners, because you were covering all sorts of news stories, but to go out and film with the gardeners was great. And he said the first filming he remembers with us, and I remember doing it, I didn't remember it was Sean till he reminded me, was at the vineyard near Nottingham,
Costock.
Eglantine Vineyard.
That's it.
Which then there weren't that many vineyards around at the time, so it was probably one of the earliest vineyards. And I remember tasting the wine, and I can't remember what it was like, to be fair. I'll have to go back and get some more.
I remember tasting something with Lord King or Lady King.
Oh yes,
when we did some filming. Yes, I can't remember the trip home, but
no, I don't. Never mind. But no, we had great fun on the radio, and we we went to Holland, didn't we, to do a phone-in, sitting by a canal in Leiden, and that was when we had budgets in those days, John, to do those things. So that's brilliant. All that sort of work, the practical side, and you still do a lot of practical work, or you always have done, haven't you? You've never left the practical side.
No, I've never left practical work. And one of my finest was working in Newstead Abbey, Lord Byron's place, and I had to plant up a bog garden, and that was fantastic. Up to your knees in mud, planting primulas and candelabra primulas and things like that. Fabulous, it really was. And of course, so I got that practical. And of course, I was writing for the Evening Post, DC Thompson, which we both wrote for. And so it was wonderful. It was, what could be better than actually doing it and writing about it and doing a bit of telly and stuff like that as well.
It's a good way to earn a living, isn't it? It's fun.
It is.
Now, we've got to mention, of course, probably one of the best known gardeners. We've talked about Arthur Billett. that a lot of people probably don't know, but I'm sure most people will know Alan Titchmarsh, because you and he were students together, weren't you, back in the 60s at Oaklands, wasn't it?
Oaklands, oh yes, yes, we were. And Alan was very, very studious, very studious. He didn't really go to the girls' park or anywhere like that, because there was a teachers training college and a nurses college, and he tended to stay at the college. But no, he was very studious, but and wrote the block review, which was fantastic. He was a very clever lad, and from Ilkley.
And that's right. And they had a name for you at college. What was your nickname?
Well, I was Digger, because I used to dig. Yes, if anybody ever sees Alan, just ask him who Digger is, and he'll say, John, because he used to dig their plots. I love digging, and also sold them, pests and stuff like that, because you have to make a pest collection. Right, I really should have been an entrepreneur, but never really made.
You weren't charging enough, and maybe being a bit more studious instead of digging other plots. You'd be doing what Alan's doing now, and he'd be talking to me.
And another highlight, of course, Martin, was when we made a television program with Thelma Barlow, bless her, Mavis.
That's right.
And I believe you saw her not too long ago.
I did, because we filmed that series. It was when we had a little break from the BBC. We weren't sacked, but we didn't have a contract renewed one year. They got a new boss, and Carlton Television were making a program. That's right, and we became the presenters. The third presenter was Thelma Barlow, the actress, and yes, that was 23 years ago we did that, and I haven't seen her since we filmed. She was a lovely lady, and it was at Tatton, RHS Tatton Flower Show this summer. We were working, and it was all to celebrate one of the cast members' 90th birthday, and they brought Thelma along as a surprise for Barbara Knox, and we went and had a chat with Thelma and talked about film, and she remembered us, and coming to the garden and filming. So it was lovely to catch up, and she's probably,
she always said she'd love to do another one with us.
Yes, but, that's right. Yes, well, they all wanted to work with us, John. Exactly, that's what it was.
And look where it got them.
Exactly. Yes. Oh, brilliant. Right, well, John, I'm going to let you go and refill your glass, because I noticed you've got a glass on your desk.
Absolutely.
This is recorded, by the way. It's not 9 o'clock in the morning. It's in the evening. I always do a few little jobs, things that people can be doing in the garden. So I'm going to do those while you go and pop a cork, and then we'll catch up in a few minutes' time.
Okay.
Oh, it's lovely to hear from John. I have very fond memories of filming with John. As you guys obviously discussed there, the filming at the vineyard. But John then went on to talk about Newstead Abbey and his bog garden. And I also filmed with John at the bog garden. And I remember him standing down in the bog, and me and the camera operator, who was a lovely fella called Richard Faulkner, who I saw the other day, actually, we were standing sort of up the rise a little bit, looking down into the bog. And John was standing under this massive, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gunnerum Manicata.
Absolutely,
It had a leaf that was, I don't know, it could have been 8 feet across. He was using it like an umbrella, but apparently it's quite unusual to find them growing so well so far north. Is that about right, Martin?
Yeah, no, it is. You see a lot of them in the southwest, and you get them in Scotland, but on the west coast where it's very mild, it's got the Gulf Stream. But yes, I know where it is, this one in Newstead Abbey, and it's quite sheltered. And the key thing is it's got to be damp underfoot, because they are essentially a bog plant. So he's a character, is John, and I've loved my time working with him over the years. And the great thing is, although we haven't sort of seen each other much for the last few years, because we've still worked together virtually, but I've lived apart from John. But when we do meet up, it's as if we've only seen each other the day before. It sort of just clicks straight back in.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Is it, am I speaking out of school to say that when you were on the TV together, people sometimes used to think you were a couple?
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's your thoughts on that, Jill?
We love John.
Well, and because we used to do holidays together as well many years ago. Yeah. I mean, you used to come as well, didn't you, with and John's wife. So yes, and it is just full of knowledge and practical gardening through and through. So always great to catch up with him, and we'll get him on again another time to get more tales from John.
Speaking of practical gardening, what things do we need to be up to this week in our gardens, Mark?
Well, good question. There's quite a lot to do. I know people often think, oh, we're in autumn now, here we are in November, there's not much to do, but there's always a job to do in the garden. You can always find something just to potter about, just spend 10 minutes doing something. And the one thing we're doing at the moment, we've just cut down our dahlias. You did some only yesterday, didn't you, Jill?
Yeah.
And they've been frosted, not badly frosted, but the tops have been damaged by some frost, which is a good time to do it because it means then there's no more energy going down into the tubers. So we've cut them down just a few inches from ground level, lifted them. Obviously, they were doing it at Paula's flower farm when we were there last week. And then I don't wash mine off because the soil is a different type of soil. We've not got sticky clay soil. So I just brush it off with my fingers. Just check the lovely fleshy tuber. And then they need storing. What you do need to do, of course, is put a label on it so you know which one it is, because they all look very, very similar. And
do you have to lift them, or could you leave them on the ground?
That's a good question. And I know lots of people on social media saying, oh, don't waste your time lifting them. But depends where you live. If you live somewhere very mild and the frost isn't going to penetrate down into the soil, then you can get away with it. And we've risked it before and left the odd one in and they survive. But if we get a cold winter, last winter would have probably killed them all because it got very frosty. So I lift them. But the other reason I do it is I think it just protects them a little bit, because if you get a very wet winter, they're prone to rotting. And then when they do start to grow in the spring, the little shoots that start to grow below soil level, they're just caviar to slugs in the soil. All those tiny little slugs think, there's nothing much to eat at this time of the year, let's nibble them off. And as Paula mentioned last week, if you're growing them for cut flowers, if you lift them and plant them, or even take cuttings off those tubers in the spring and create new plants, they will always produce the strongest plants and the longest stemmed flowers, which is what anybody for cut flowers want. So yes, I lift them, but there's lots of ways to do it in gardening. So that dahlias is one thing. I'm going to do another job as well.
Okay.
Pruning, I've got my secateurs in hand. The buddleia, if you've got any buddleia, and buddleias are great for attracting butterflies and bees and insects into the garden, late flower. And they get very tall, and if they're 6, 7, 8 feet tall, they'll just whip around in the wind. So it's a good idea just to prune them down by about half, just protects them a little bit over winter, just tidies them up.
But can the birds benefit from if we don't cut them down?
Well, they can, and that's a very good point as well, Mrs. Fish. You're on it today, aren't you? Because yes, you've got all those seed pods on there, lots of tiny seeds, and the finches and seed-eating birds absolutely love them.
So if you cut them down, they're missing out.
They are, but what you can do is cut some of the flower heads off with a short stalk, bundle them together, and tie them in a tree, hang them like you would put a bird feeder.
Nice.
And the birds can get on them, little insects can still get in there and hide. So you're still creating a wildlife habitat and not depleting them of food, but you are tidying up your garden so the buddleia is in better condition.
If you did that with some nice brown twine or some raffia, it could actually look quite a feature. You could hang that on the fence, couldn't you, as well?
You could, yes. You could even then bring a few in for Christmas decorations and spray them silver. We might do that for Sean's Christmas.
The birds wouldn't eat them then, would they?
We're going to move on now from Jill's recipe tips to crafting for Christmas.
Exactly, yeah. You're a man of many talents. And the third, exactly, the third one is inside. So if it's too wet and cold, because I know some places have had a horrendous rain. We've had it pretty wet, but I know there's places had it much, much wetter. Then if you've got a few house plants, don't forget them. They're not going to grow as quickly through the winter, and they won't need watering as much. But now the heating's back on, I think most people have probably got a bit of heat on in the house at the moment, they will still dry out. So just check the watering. And what I like to do is I've stopped giving my normal houseplant feed, which is usually high nitrogen to promote leaf growth, but I want to just give them a little bit of nutrient. So I'm actually giving them a tomato feed. I won't get tomatoes on them, but what it will do, it's a high potash feed. And what that'll do is sort of build up the plant's strength for the winter. It's like an all-round good conditioner, a bit like us taking multivitamins. So you can do that and maybe do it once a month through the winter, that high potash feed, and just keep them moist, not wet, and good light, and they'll do really well over the winter and you can thoroughly enjoy them.
What about those little pellets you get, those kind of like long-term fertilizers? Is that good to use, or are they kind of for a different time of year? I'm asking because I've got a jar of it in the shed and I'm thinking, oh, I should sprinkle those around it.
No, that's one of the slow release fertilizers, Sean. So yeah, you put these little pellets in and they release the nutrients slowly over several months, depending which type you've got. No, I wouldn't use them now because you don't want that burst of growth as such, because the plant's not growing much, short days, cooler temperatures. So save that for probably April, May time, and then that will feed them all the way through the summer.
Fantastic. I think we need to get back to John and find out what else you've been chatting about.
Right, well, I'm back now with John Stirland, well-known horticulturist, practical gardener, jolly good all-round egg is John. John, you born and bred in Nottinghamshire through and through, but a few years ago you moved to Norfolk. But why, for a start? Why did you move to Norfolk?
Well, Mum brought me to Norfolk in 1964 on holiday, and I
never took me back.
I fell in. Yeah, I never knew where she went, and I know I fell in love with the place, and so I've always had an inkling to come over. And the sort of we've had a cottage here, and then we decided, shall we go to Norfolk? And Shirley said, yeah. So yeah, we came to Fakenham, and it's a lovely town, 8 miles from Wells. You know, everybody who says, oh, do you live that near Wells? Because there's so many people love Wells next to the sea, and it is nice, Mark, to be sort of just pop and have a walk on the beach, which is lovely. You know, so that's nice. Yeah. So yes, I've got here and sort of decided to retire, and then you end up. Getting an allotment, and then now I'm working at the local junior school because after COVID, the children do really need a bit of stimulus, to tell you the truth. So Tesco put them the school allotment in, and so we're starting it off again after COVID, and so we're getting the children working in there from next spring. We're just getting it back to something like Fakenham Gardening Club I'm now involved with. So yes.
You can't stop a good man.
So write that down, Mark, because you'll be coming to do a talk for us.
Right, I'm more than happy to, yes. And it's great that you're getting involved with the kids, because I know we've got our little grandson. He's started school, and they're talking of starting a little garden, and I'd love to get involved with them. So I think it's great that you're doing that. It's getting them young, isn't it? Getting this.
Yes, absolutely.
Excuse the pun, but it's sowing that seed early on in life, isn't it? That it gets that interest and it stays with you.
Yes, even sometimes, they get into girls, but and later on, and then, but they always tend to come back.
Yeah,
to it. The other thing I'm doing, Martin, is one called Loving Your Garden, which is a Facebook page. Rod Whiting, who's an ex-BBC from Lincolnshire, he started Loving Your Garden up just before he left Radio Lincoln, and they let him take it with him. So that's just people putting pictures of the gardens on. We've got 125,000 members. Every other Sunday, I give an hour we have a guest or answer questions and things like that, or just chat about what needs doing at that time of year. So yes, so sort of semi-retirement really, or quarter retirement.
Yeah, well, I think gardeners never fully retire, do they? Because even if they stop their paid job, they always carry on doing it because they love it. Yes, that's the thing.
Yeah.
You touched on allotments, and I know now you're in Fakenham, you've got yourself an allotment that is yours, haven't you? I saw it on Facebook earlier this year. And, because you've always had a garden where you've grown in the garden, but what does it feel like? Because I'm toying with the idea, because although we've got a decent sized garden here, there's not room to have a big enough veg plot for me. I'm actually going to be using a friend's part of their garden across the road, but in a year or two's time, I wouldn't mind getting an allotment. So do you enjoy going down the allotment? Is it a good place to meet people?
Yeah,
is there good camaraderie there?
Yes, there is. And it's not far away. If I'd got, say, 10-minute drive, I don't think I'd do it. But I've got myself a bike. I go down the hill, up the other side. It's 5 minutes away. So So it's I love it. I really do, Martin. You never know what you're going to get, because allotments, they've been going for hundreds of years, so they could have every pest and disease in the ground that you could think of. But it's another challenge. You've got to have challenges, and it's brilliant. I love it. Did a pH test just to check, the different pHs on it. And I absolutely love it. And the people around are fabulous. Yeah, they really are. Everybody wants to have a chat to you.
Yeah. Which is nice, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Do you take a flask with your cup of coffee in?
No,
or do you have
I've got a little.
I've got a little
stove. I've got a little stove, and I've got a saucepan, and I boil some water, and I've got a little tin with coffee and stuff in it. So get my chair out. Yeah.
I'm warming to the idea of an allotment, because it just, like you say, it meets a different group of people, and it's that sort of community, isn't it, there? And I know one of the first things you did, because you love your greenhouses, and although you always tell me off for calling them a greenhouse.
Yeah. Oh yes, a glass house. Yes, I've got a glass house. That was one of I got a 6x10 from Halls, and they gave it me at a good price. Or I couldn't get it free like you do, Mark, normally, but I got it for a good price.
I'll give you a few lessons.
Yeah, it's I love it. A freezing cold day in winter, the sun's out, you go in there and it's 60 degrees. It's fabulous. I can make my cup of tea, take it in there, and sit in my chair there. You see,
yes,
everybody wants to come because it's warm.
Well, it just extends the growing season as well.
Absolutely,
you can grow so much more. Exactly. Yeah. Now, we mustn't let you go without mentioning an apple called Pilgrim 400. This is a new apple that was introduced a few years ago by you, John. You discovered it. But tell us the story of why you did it and what it commemorates.
Well, it commemorates the Pilgrim Fathers going from Plymouth or Southampton or wherever they went from in 1620. So it's 400 years in 2020. So in 2015, I decided to ask on Radio Nottingham if anybody had got an apple from a pip. Usually they're not very good. And a lady rang up from Southwell, Southall, whatever you want to call it. And she said, we've got one. So I went and had a look, and it was marvellous. It was a lovely apple. And I says, are you sure it's from a pip? She says, yes, a little girl planted. The people before us sowed it. A little girl sowed it. I says, well, do you mind if we use it for the Pilgrim Fathers? Well, they were delighted. And so Pete Wilkinson at Old England Nurseries, who you know well, propagated us 25, and we planted the first one at Scrooby, where William Brewster, the main head, sort of the first pilgrim, came from. We planted one at Scrooby near the church,
which is in Nottinghamshire, isn't it?
Yes,
North Nottinghamshire.
Yes. North Nottinghamshire is a big area for them. With Sir John Peace, who's the Lord Lieutenant of Nottingham. And yes, it was a wonderful day. And a lot of the others have been planted around the country. Southampton, we went to Southampton. There's been planted in Plymouth as well, of course. So, yeah, I planted one in Norfolk when I came here, at Harleston, where a couple of chaps who went on the Mayflower came from. So, yeah, it's been one of the highlights, really, Martin. It's been registered as a brand new variety, Pilgrim 400. It isn't commercially grown, but Matthews, the famous fruit people, they are trialing it to see if it's got any merit. So, they should be producing by now. So we'll see what they say about it.
Well, I need to get a bit more graftwood, because I had a young one coming on. But that, along with quite a few other apples that I'd grafted in pots to move to our new garden to plant a cordon hedge, were all ring-barked by squirrels in the winter. And I lost about 7 or 8 trees to the squirrels. So they've all got, the new ones I've planted, have got guards on them now until they get a bit bigger. So I need to get a bit more graftwood to get another Pilgrim 400, because that is the story of Mr. Stirland, that
well, you get one off the actual tree. You'd be best to go and get some off the actual.
Yes, when you're out one day, just climb over the fence.
Round the back.
Exactly.
I'm sure they'd be delighted to see you, Mark. I know you've had a photograph taken underneath it.
I have, exactly. That's great. So no, I think that's really good. And what is fascinating about it is, well, that was discovered in, it's been there for probably 20 years, but you discovered it in 2015 and it's now become a named apple. The famous Bramley apple, the cooking apple that's known worldwide, was discovered in the same market town of Southwell in Nottinghamshire, less than a mile away, but 200 years previous, which is, what a coincidence is that?
It's incredible. There's something about the place, isn't there? But it is a lovely Minster town.
It is.
And my sister, in fact, my sister lives there as well. So
there you go.
Which is nice.
Good.
One of the just a very quick one, Mark. One of the nicest things was to get my 50 years long service medal from the RHS. That's lovely as well.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, 50 years of practical horticulture. Well, I'm looking forward to getting your 100th one, John.
Oh dear,
marvelous, John. It's been great catching up, and we'll do it again because there's so much we could talk about. Because another time we'll get you to do a pruning masterclass, because that's something that you are passionate about.
I love pruning. Absolutely,
we need to get you doing that. So we'll do that again. But for now, John, thank you very much, and enjoy that allotment.
I will do. Don't you worry. I'll be up there tomorrow.
One thing that struck me there is that you talked about allotments, and obviously, Martin, you're toying with the idea, and I have a friend who's an allotment and he nips down there all the time. So I think they are a great thing. And actually, just because of crazy coincidences, yesterday I was filming in an allotment, not for Pots and Trowels. Yeah, I was filming I was actually filming about activity and getting people moving for a charity, and it was Derbyshire Refugee Solidarity. Now, whatever your feelings on refugees, we're not getting into that. We're not political. But there's definitely a fact of getting out in the fresh air and doing things in a garden or in an allotment is good for people. It's just good for people. Having lunch on the allotment with a hunk of bread and some cheese. They were planting garlic. They were planting onions. And it's a good time for that. We've been doing some planting onions and things in the garden. Well, I say we, in a video sense, Jill, Martin.
In our Pots and Trowels videos, we were doing some elephant garlic, which is fantastic. So all about how to plant that. And then we've got one coming up, very exciting, because we are reshaping our back garden. So we've done loads of work on the front, but then in this Pots and Trowels, we are just starting the borders in our back garden. So this one in particular, we want to do straight away because we've got this huge, ugly manhole in the middle of our back garden, so we really want to disguise that. So we're having a look at getting that done.
Exactly. Watch this space, because you can still see it, but by the time it's planted by next midsummer, it will be hidden. But it has to be accessible, but it will be hidden. But no, I'm with you on the allotments, and they're a great place, and I am thinking of getting one. Probably not rushing into it straight away because we're just so busy through the summer. But I think when I've got a bit more time, our veg plot is more than adequate, but I always like to grow even more. And a friend is letting us use a little bit of her garden, which is brilliant. But if I can, there are some small allotments in the next village, and if one of those becomes available in a year or two's time, I can plant it just with fruit, permanent things, and just let Jill use it to fill the freezer. And it is a good activity, it's good exercise, and a good community, and it proves it. We were down at the Willoughby Road allotments in Boston, in Lincolnshire, just a few weeks ago, and if you haven't seen that video, you can get it on our Pots and Trowels videos, and that brings people in from all different ethnic backgrounds and the communities, and it is just a wonderful place to be. I could, even without an allotment, you could just go and sit and have a drink and chat to people.
From what I understand, you might have to put your name down now, Mark, because there's often quite a waiting list for these things.
I've already got it on the list. So, yes.
You heard it here
exactly,
first.
Yes. So, we've got a couple of questions, I think, as well, haven't we, that we need to do. The first one. Hi, Martin, Jill and Sean. I've got a brown fig in a pot on my patio, and it grew lots of figs late in the season, and they are fairly big. Do I have to remove them? As lots of advice is to, as they won't overwinter. Kind regards, Angie in Leicestershire. So not too far from us. And she's included a really clear photograph of a really healthy brown turkey fig, similar size to the one that we've got, isn't it, really? In a nice container there. growing well in a sunny corner. And they are quite big for this time of the year, the figs. The leaves have gone yellow and are falling off. So, Angie, yes, you do need to take them off because unfortunately, it's just that they haven't matured fast enough for you for this year for whatever reason. And although they look a decent sized fig on there, they're not going to overwinter. As soon as we get some cold weather, they will fall off, they will rot. So what we normally do is we take any underdeveloped or figs that haven't made it to ripening off at this time of the year, just snap them off. What you would leave on are any small ones in the growing points. And I'm just looking at your photograph.
Yeah, how small is small?
Well, normally sort of little fingernail size.
Okay.
Anything that's smaller, what we call an embryo fruit, we would leave those on, and they normally overwinter. It might be worth, in very frosty weather, just putting a few layers of fleece over it to give it a little bit of extra protection. Hopefully they survive, and then they will start and grow next year. So plenty of high potash feed next year when it starts to grow, and hopefully, fingers crossed, you'll get them to ripen by late summer and enjoy them.
Superb. The question that came in on YouTube was basically in response to a video, as usual, on YouTube, where we were in your garden looking at some of the fruit trees that you're turning into a fredge, a fruit hedge.
Right.
And Nagina K said, "What a lovely idea for a hedge. Please do keep us updated on its progress. I'm sure we will." And basically she's thinking of she's planning to grow her own fruit tree, but doesn't have much garden space, so she's thinking containers. Now she's already looking at dwarf varieties, but what sort of fruits should she grow in a container? What grows best?
Well, you can more or less grow any fruit in a container. We've just been talking about Angie's fig, so that's a good one. And it depends where you live. I mean, if you live in a very warm climate, then you can have all your citrus growing in them as well. If you're in a colder climate, you're in the UK or somewhere similar, then it's obviously got to be hardy, unless you've got somewhere frost-free over the winter. But certainly, you can do apples and pears, dwarf peaches, you can grow in them, figs. So it's more or less sky's the limit. Do what you enjoy, plant what you enjoy eating. What I would say is don't worry about them being the really dwarf ones. You can often see now advertised very dwarf, peaches, very dwarf plums, very dwarf apples. But the fact that you're going to grow it in a container will have a dwarfing effect on it as well. So I wouldn't go for necessarily those very dwarf ones, because I find they don't always grow that well, and fruit particularly well. I'm not going to say they're a gimmick, but they're not always that fruitful. So I'd go for something
bonsai apples,
yeah, more or less, if you're not careful. So go for just a semi-dwarfing rootstock that in a garden would grow to maybe 10 feet, but in a pot, the fact that the roots are restricted, it would probably only go to 4 or 5 feet. And the secret is get a good quality compost. So if you're buying bags of compost, multi-purpose compost from a garden centre or a nursery, try and get one that's got some added loam into it, or buy a bag of compost, get some good quality topsoil and put maybe a third of the volume of topsoil in and mix it in, and then some of that magic fertilizer that you've got in your shed, Sean, that slow release fertilizer, so it will give it plenty of nutrients. And that way, because of the loam, you can leave them in there for many years and they'll grow perfectly well. And of course, water in the summer.
I'll point her at this podcast. I shall put a link to the podcast on the YouTube comment, because I don't think I can write all that out onto the YouTube comments. But there's a thing, joking aside, that it is better to have this chat or have this conversation or give you the space to talk about something like this rather than try to answer it in a comment where I don't think it comes across as well as just listening to a great podcast like this.
Oh, absolutely. No, you're right. You can answer some questions by typing them out, but you can't have a comment that's 4 miles long, can you? Because I just rub it on.
But also it's having that sounding board. So, for instance, when we were discussing the fig tree earlier, and you said when they're small, and Jill quite rightly said, "What's small?" Because small to me might be a pea, or it might be
No, you're right. Yes, so that's why we want your questions on this podcast.
Exactly. So make sure you email them in. So hopefully you've got that pen that we talked about before now, and you'll be able to write down that it's info@pots&trowels.com. Or if you're on a podcast provider, or if you're watching / listening to this on YouTube, just pop a a comment in there, or look in the description at the show notes, and we'll have all our links in there. We'll go to potsandtrowels.com. Have I plugged it enough
I
yet?
think you've
you
mentioned
have.
it a couple of times, yes. And don't forget to listen to the next one, because we've got something very exciting guest. I'm going to visit the people at Lincolnshire Pond Plants, who exhibit at all the flower shows, Chelsea, Hampton Court, gold medal winners. I'm going to find out what you should be doing with your pond through the autumn and the winter. So that will be on next week's Pots and Trowels podcast.
Hopefully not chipping through the ice.
Hopefully
Great
not,
stuff.
yes. I'll take my waders. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah,
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Watch the videos on YouTube or Facebook, follow us on Instagram, Twitter or X, and subscribe to the podcast and never miss a thing. For more information, go to potsandtrowels.com.